Hi, Stuart. Good to see you. And thanks for taking part in the Makers Marketing Mastermind. I understand that the the concept or the topic of this one is a little bit meta because I'm interviewing you on effectively how to interview SMEs. But yeah, it's good to have you on the mastermind.
Thanks, Elliot.
It would be great before I could dive into the questions and we really get into the kind of meat and bones of this topic of specifically SME interviews, to get an understanding of your background and how you've arrived at where you are today.
Yes, so I started as an electronics engineer. I studied electronics at university. I worked in the industry at semiconductor vendors for many years, and most of that role involved going out to visit customers and help them select the appropriate chip that would help them to make a coffee maker or implement a washing machine or an industrial sensor of some kind. So over the years, I spent a lot of time looking at that process, understanding how those experts choose particular chips. And over time, I was sort of intrigued to understand a bit more of the marketing aspect. How are we going to convince engineers on a broader scale which chips were relevant and what would work for them? How do we build trust with those experts to make sure that they think of us first when they are designing a new product? So over time, my career went from being an engineer in the field and a trainer in the field to being more of a marketing person doing content creation. So I joined a PR agency, worked there for a while as mostly writing content for various electronic manufacturers and semiconductor manufacturers. And 5 years ago, I went freelance and started doing that on a freelance basis, writing white papers, blog posts, trade articles, ebooks, all sorts of content that was required, but focusing on the tech side of that process and working closely with graphics designers to do that. I think over the last couple of years, what's become apparent, especially with the massive growth in social media and videos, also considering that Gen Z is getting older. Generation Z is going to be 28, 29 this year, maybe even 30, depending on where you put the goalposts. And they've grown up with smartphones. They've grown up with video as a medium to consume content. And of course, the natural thought process then is, well, surely for that generation, we need to make sure we have video. And how can we efficiently use video without spending 10,000 euros per video, as people have done in the past with, say, image films for their companies and things like that? How can we optimize it and make it financially attainable for people?
Okay, great. And I guess a big part of that now seems to be a shift towards, as opposed to very highly produced video content of, say, the manufacturing facility or some kind of promotional video, seems to be more towards SME style, expert led interviews. Have you seen, how much have you seen the kind of shift happen then over the last few years towards that?
Well, I think we're still in the process of doing this at the minute. It's taking time. I think the B2B marketers have mostly focused on webinars. Webinars have been an interesting tool for them because it gives them the opportunity to share domain knowledge, in-depth expertise, which is obviously what helps buyers to build up trust in a particular supplier. That's a great thing. The problem with webinars is obviously there's an enormous amount of work that has to go in to create the presentations. We're not just taking a sales presentation that we've prepared for a customer. There might be further slides that need to be done there. Images need to be created. There's often an approval process. So it can take days and days to create the presentation. Then you need to potentially work with a media partner to get that promoted. And what happens? You get all these people who log in, and as the webinar is going on, they're sitting there responding to emails or continuing on with their work. And the person with the domain knowledge is hidden behind the slide. So I don't have that person-to-person interaction. I don't know who's talking to me necessarily. And I think it's become a bit of an old-fashioned method of reaching out to people through a webinar. And from what I've heard recently, there's a tendency to want to move away from it. And the natural process then is to go more into a subject matter expert and SME interview. And that's what I've been sort of championing and working with magazines, with trade magazines to do that. I do expert interviews at trade fairs as well. I try to share some of my and podcasts via LinkedIn. So I think there's lots of other people out there in that domain as well working on it, but it's a bit unclear at the minute who's supposed to be doing that. B2B trade media hasn't really grabbed it to the, as you'd hope. And I think there's still a lot more to be done to do it. But I think there's huge advantages by taking a video first approach and getting your experts onto video.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've just been speaking to Niall Sullivan, who is head of marketing at Sensei at Siemens, and he uses their podcast and kind of subject matter expert interviews as the complete engine for their content. And I think it's a completely different perspective to take from a marketer, especially, within manufacturing. But once you start seeing it as not just like a standalone channel, but as the kind of hub of future content, repurposing content, and a really good kind of way of getting original insight and then repurposing it and spreading it across other channels, I think that is the value that a lot of people miss when they first hear about, okay, well, let's set up or let's start doing podcast interviews with our, internally with our subject matter experts or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that's the major point really, is that people have sort of assumed that when we do video, you need to go to an agency, you need to get a video team in, set up all the lighting, have a studio prepared, that there's a lot of cost involved in that, a lot of organization. And to be honest, it doesn't need to be like that anymore. Firstly, social media has shown us that any video is good.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be polished. It doesn't have to be edited to the nth degree and beautifully made. It's enough just to get people in front of the camera in a manner which allows them to express their domain knowledge and allow trust to be built up in your organization and those people who are already talking to customers on a regular basis. And if you make that link and decide, yes, then we need to start with some sort of video-based material as the starting point for content creation, it resolves a lot of challenges and problems. I think the next part is also to understand that the channels that are available to B2B marketing teams have changed completely in the last 20 years. We've got social media channels, firstly, with lots of different formats, but we've also got our own blog posts. We have trade media still with trade articles. We have other B2B marketing activities that demand content, and that content has to come from somewhere. And typically the content has to come from the experts. Now, the experts are engineers or scientists inside your organization, and their job is to continue building stuff, support customers, do experiments, and they don't have a lot of time for supporting marketing activities, and they're also not writers. So most B2B organizations are already using external people like myself to write on their behalf. We still start by interviewing their experts because that's where the expertise is. That's where the stories are. So that's already going on. So if you're going to have that interview with somebody on Zoom, why not just turn that into a recorded interview and take it from there? And I think the other point is we see a lot of turmoil in social media. The Twitter X example is a good one. People lose access to their Facebook accounts and Instagram accounts and also LinkedIn accounts, for example. And those platforms and those algorithms will continue to change. We keep seeing that as well. So whatever it is you're doing, you need a really efficient way to get from the original content creation step, which should be video, in order that it doesn't matter what happens in the future, you can continue to turn that core initial content into anything you need for any channel as quickly and efficiently as possible. So that could be a long form video, short form video, long or short form texts, also graphics, also audio podcasts, things like infographics and things like that. And also be aware that we're at a point in time where the demographic out there demands a huge range of different types of content. So we've got people of my age and older, we're used to reading things, so we want some long form content to read. There's people younger than me that are used to having video, maybe use YouTube all the time to answer their questions. And then we've got Gen Z and in future Gen Alpha coming along, and they only know things like TikTok or Instagram videos in a portrait format. So you need to be able to deliver something to them. So unless you've actually got that video as a starting point, you can't create any more video. You don't have any B-roll, any library of content that you might want to draw upon. And if people have said things, it's easy to get transcripts out of these materials, which then form the basis for written material. And we must also take into account that large language models are there, AI is there, they're only going to get better. And by providing them with that source material, we're going to be able to repurpose things a lot quicker than we've ever been able to do before.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point in terms of having the transcripts as well of those videos. And if you organize it in the right way and do the work after you've done the work of actually recording the video, of organizing it into a content library and having those transcripts, like you said, with large language models, it can really pull out some interesting insights that you might even miss, 6 months down the line when you're trying to remember that interview you've done. It can suddenly give you such a great body of unique data to your own marketing function that will then just pay dividends continuously again and again.
Yeah, exactly.
So it'd be great to get into the process then you have for getting ready to interview a subject matter expert, and really starting from the beginning and kind of moving forward. What does that prep process look like, and how do you make sure that you're asking the right questions in that interview?
Obviously, for me, I'm focused on the electronics and semiconductor industry, so I have decades of experience in that space, and I have a very good understanding of what the audience wants out of that space. But I think that's really the starting point. You need to have a good understanding of what that market and the people inside that market want to know about, what their challenges are. So that's core to all of this. And if you personally don't have that, then you want to find somebody who can help you explore that and make sure the right sort of questions come into the process. But the very start of the process, I would say, is an initial call with the SME. You need to understand that topic. You need to understand also throughout that call what the SME's domain of expertise is. They may be a cybersecurity expert, but they may be certain areas of cybersecurity that they don't deal with, that they have no knowledge of, or there's maybe some standards that are generally well known, but they don't have anything to do with them. So you don't want to be in a situation, I think, where you are going to ask the person something where they won't know the answer to, because that will leave them feeling a bit dejected, a little bit unsure about the whole process. So in that initial call, it's all about understanding what their specific domain is within the domain of expertise that you're going to be talking to them about. The other thing I always do is once I've done that, I take a step back and I prepare the questions and I share it with the guests in advance. Because what we're trying to do here is about getting a great performance from the SME. I'm not trying to grill them like a political journalist does with a member of parliament in the UK or any other politician. What we're trying to do is make them feel comfortable so that they can talk about the thing that they know a lot about and they enjoy sharing information about. So that's a good starting point. That doesn't mean that the list of questions are the only things I'm going to ask, but that's going to form the basic core of the structure of the interview with the SME. Another important thing is obviously to do your own research on the topic, find maybe some stories that have happened recently to provide some context to the interview, and also check other things like acronyms and initialisms. What do those mean? What are the latest standards in that space, and so on. When it actually comes to the interview itself, I also try to top and tail it with a good introduction and a good outro so that we sort of pick people up and show people through the first few minutes what this is going to be about, essentially the same as what you've done today. And at the end of it, I also want to have some sort of summaries that sort of summarizes what's been said and gives people a takeaway and potentially gives them some information as to what they can do next. So you can visit a website, you can download a white paper. In a marketing context, that's obviously what we're trying to achieve with the content we're trying to create. And I think the overarching thing that people should keep in their mind is to respect the audience. Think about what the audience needs are, what are their questions, and respect their time. So I personally find the long, rambling discussions that some podcasts have disrespectful in some ways. They've told me they're going to tell me about a particular topic, and I'm 10 minutes into the podcast, and everyone's had a chat about something, but we haven't actually spoken about the topic. Sometimes we've not even introduced the expert yet. So I think that's also a key element of that as well. Keep it focused and attuned to the needs of your audience.
Okay, great. There's also some good tips for me there then. I was listening to it thinking, okay, this isn't just advice for the marketers within the community. I think some experience that I've had, as well as speaking to other in-house marketers, has been the subject matter experts, often engineers, scientists, very intelligent within their field, but not often natural communicators. And sometimes it's a struggle to even get them on camera. I guess it's a two-pronged question really. Is do you have to sell the interview much in terms of like the benefits to them or the wider business? And if and once you've got them to agree to that interview or podcast, how do you draw those insights out without it becoming too bogged down in the technical complexity? How do you kind of rescue it from going a bit too deep sometimes?
I think this is the sort of, like you said, there's two parts to that question, and there's two elements to it. Firstly, there is the respect for the guest themselves. If somebody says they are not willing to go on camera and talk about something, that they just don't want to do it at all, you have to respect that. There's nothing really you can do about it. So I would sort of respect the guest. But obviously, in terms of trying to change their mind, I obviously try to change a lot of people's minds, because lots of people don't want to speak on camera. But I try to use my expertise and my domain knowledge to make them feel comfortable. And when they realize that I know what they do and I can answer questions that they will be able to answer, then they start to feel a lot more comfortable about the whole process. And lots of people change their mind and say, oh, okay, well, if it's that, or, if I know what the questions are in advance, then I'm prepared to do it. Obviously, nobody wants to walk into this and look silly on camera. And that's really what you're trying to avoid. You're trying to avoid people thinking that might be an outcome. And that's obviously not the outcome. I also tell people as well, if it's not a live stream, if we're recording something, I always say, if at any point you lose your way or you're not happy about the way the interview is going, just say, we can stop and we can start again. I can give you the question again and you can have another go. And, people sometimes take that opportunity and restart it. But yeah, generally, I think it's about trust and making sure people know that they're going to be respected through that process. Otherwise, I mean, I agree with you. We have a sort of joke that says the way you can tell an outgoing engineer is the fact that they talk to your feet instead of their own feet. So, we know that we're introverted in an engineering and scientific community. There's exceptions to that, but generally people aren't the sort of people that walk up to anybody on the street and just start talking to people. However, what I do find in the subject matter expert domain is when you start talking to them about what they're interested in and about their work or their scientific research, they are willing to tell you absolutely everything about it and become very animated as a result. So that's sort of helpful to have in your back pocket. The fact that they know the questions up front and they know me and that I'm working to get the best out of them, that gives them a lot of confidence. But it's also the skill of the interviewer to sort of keep an ear out as you're going through the interviewing process and start thinking. Sometimes I make notes as I'm interviewing somebody, so as that if they say something that is unclear or they use an acronym that maybe won't be known, then I go in and ask them to explain that in a bit more detail. It's really a case of, again, trying to understand your audience and listen as an audience member and think, oh, if I heard that in the context of the interview as it is at this minute, would I fully understand it or would it confuse me? And I think that's really, sort of good approach to interviewing that would help to get the best out of anybody.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like I said, I found that once you get onto the area of expertise, that engineers are typically naturally very good teachers, especially when they're at the level where they're the expert within the organization, because they've had to sit down with a lot of junior engineers over the years and teach them these concepts and very complex topics and break them down. So it is amazing sometimes seeing the transformation from staring at your feet to being actually really quite fluent and being able to understand and explain these complex terms and whatever they're talking about. Next question really then is the kind of question or story arc that you use. So do you follow a set structure or flow to those interviews to keep the conversation engaging? Do you have a couple of different frameworks that you use? How do you approach, when you're envisaging how that kind of conversation interview is going to go?
Well, I think the important thing to remember here is that this interview is with a subject matter expert and it's being set up by a marketing team to deliver some knowledge and build up some trust in the audience. It's not the sort of interview that you might be used to seeing on the television where it can get combative and you're trying to trip somebody up and find something out that they don't want to tell you. Yeah. So this is a collaborative interview process. With that in mind, and also thinking back again to the audience, what I try to do is come in at a level where we can pick up a lowest common denominator of knowledge. Obviously, I don't want to explain in my personal context what semiconductor is and what a particular electronic application is. But if we start at the beginning, it does help to create sort of, I would say, a scaffolding around which the rest of the interview can build upon. So I did a topic on signal integrity with analog devices recently, and we started right at the very beginning. So, what is signal integrity? What some of the parameters around that I would want to understand? What sort of impact does that have on the applications I'm trying to build? And what challenges would I come up against if I wasn't thinking about signal integrity right from the very beginning of the application development? So by doing that, you immediately get some groundwork in and get some terminology in and get some understanding in for that terminology. So if somebody doesn't come from that space specifically, as an engineer, they understand some of those terms, and now they're getting some fleshing out of what that's all about. So that gets everyone talking and understanding about what we know about. From there, it's a case of then, as you say, creating a story arc. My story arc is very simple. We start at the basics with an introduction. We sort of stitch in all the necessary bits. And often what we're trying to do is we're trying to get to some sort of product or service that my company or my interviewee creates or has developed or is trying to promote. But the important thing is to try and to get all the necessary puzzle pieces in place so that when we can sort of fully describe what the challenge is, what the issues are with making that type of sensor or implementing that type of device for Internet of Things applications or whatever it might be. That once we've got halfway or 2/3 of the way through the interview, we can now introduce what the guest does and the guest's employer does, because we've built up trust and understanding, and everyone sees, oh, this person knows what they're talking about. Now I'm prepared to understand and listen to what they're selling, essentially, and bring that into sort of the last third of the interview.
Okay, so we mentioned earlier in terms of the benefit of the interview from not just the standalone piece of content that you've got there. So you've got your story arc. And then when we're thinking about it from a repurposing angle and using that content again and again, when you're building out that story arc or when you're actually in the interview, are you asking specific questions for that you think would make a good snapshot or clip? Or are you kind of going through the interview first and then at the end thinking, okay, this is the body of content, let's try and chop it up and repurpose it from here?
Yeah, I don't really have repurposing in mind as I'm creating the interview and executing the interview. To be perfectly honest, I think the little nuggets of gold and the secret sauce that people want to know about comes out through the interview itself, and you can't really preempt that. And often you'll ask a question or maybe go deeper on a particular area that comes up in conversation, and then you hit gold, and that becomes something that you say, oh, that'd be really good to have as a little snippet for social media, as a short or a reel. So I don't think about that in advance, but I would say, yeah, I mean, repurposing is absolutely key. And if you have a good starting point interview where you've got a knowledgeable interviewer together with a good domain knowledge SME, then you're just going to get good content. Good stuff comes out of it, and that you get that sort of engineer to engineer or scientist to scientist conversation that is essentially what B2B marketers need in order to create trustworthy content for whatever channels and whatever needs they might have. I think the most important thing is, as I said before, we need to understand that our audience is multi-generational, and those multi-generational needs, content needs, are there. And therefore, long form, short form video, audio only, long and short form text is what you're trying to achieve out of that. At the end of the day, always think the buying team that is out there, which is different to the buying person in business to in B2C, business to consumer context. With B2B, we're trying to convince various people in the team to buy from us. What we're trying to do is build trust in that team at a supplier, because at the end of the day, they'll look at all of that, they'll review all of that in their long process of considering all the options, and they've probably mostly decided for you before you've even met them as a result of the content you've shared.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And the buying journey just seems to get increasingly complex, like you said, as different generations become part of that team, that then having video layered on top of it as the unique perspective, and then having all those different repurposed elements are able to be, they then act as touch points for those different members of the team over sometimes what can be, a years long journey.
Yeah. I think one thing I would add there as well is that there's a lot of discussion about analytics and automated marketing technologies, but the companies that I often work with are small to medium sized companies. They don't have enough website visitors to or visitors to the LinkedIn page to make use of numerical data in that way to sort of optimize their marketing. It's really sort of hunches and a view of what seems to be working, what seems to be capturing the imagination through the number of interactions on a LinkedIn post or the number of views of a video on YouTube. And if you take out sort of like this need to automate everything and have everything analyzed in finite detail and all that sort of thing, if you're limited on budget and you're limited on personnel to deliver your marketing campaign, then what you've really got to do is you've got to lead with good quality content, because that's what's going to draw people in.
Right. I think it's definitely going to become a core skill for marketers, both in-house as well as speaking to freelancers, consultants, agencies, to be able to nail this process down of SME interview to multi pieces of content, and that being the kind of, I like the idea of it being the content engine really of that marketing function. And I do see it coming across more and more in conversations now, especially as you see other industries really adopt it, especially, software seems to be ahead of the curve compared to manufacturing industrials anyway.
Yeah.
Do you, for marketers, and this could be an in-house marketing team of one, which offers, in a lot of these manufacturing businesses, it might be a 50-person team, but there's one person that does the marketing, or smaller content teams. Do you have any advice for them if they're looking to start SME interviews, subject matter expert interviews in-house, and kind of how to get started with that process?
I think the most, obviously there's lots of moving parts to all of this. You can see my studio here. I spent quite a bit of time and a fair amount of money, but not huge amounts of money, getting a good camera, getting good lighting, having a backdrop which is appropriate to my domain. All those things in place so that I can make a compelling video interview. I think there's all those different elements that need to come into place to make all of that work. But you can do very well on a budget of sort of $500, €500 approximately, and get yourself set up. I think one of the most important things is to try and give it a go. You don't have to produce and share everything that you create. Have a test process. One of the things I did was actually go on a TV presenting course. I found that very helpful to understand how to work with the camera, how to engage with an audience through a lens. It's different to having a conversation with a person on a trade show floor or in an office, in a meeting. But I think the absolute core to all of this is if you're going to go down this path of video first content creation and having that as your starting point to give you a library of content which you can really leverage and use to your advantage in your B2B marketing activities on a day-to-day basis, is to focus on the story. There is always a story in whoever it is you're talking to, whatever it is you're talking about. It can be a power supply, it could be a software package for creating software as a service applications, whatever it is, somebody will have a story about how it works or how it didn't work and how that was solved. And the people that are listening, that are also in that domain and are challenged by those issues on a day-to-day basis, they will appreciate hearing. And if you put the story first, if you go out and find the story and build your interview around that aspect of it, you will always get to the product or service that you're trying to promote. Leave that until last. You will get there. You will talk about it. But if you just talk about that, it's dull and boring. So, have a conversation with people just as you would when you meet them in person. And I think if you follow that guidance, you'll be well supported and deliver some great stuff.
Yeah, that's a really good snippet of advice there. I think something as well I heard from a marketer that has started doing SME interviews in-house, and it was a very new concept to them as a business, as well as them as a marketer, was they actually started doing recorded interviews with the intention of not actually using the video, but just using the transcript and repurposing that into long form articles and everything like that, just to get used to the process of doing these interviews and getting the subject matter experts in-house used to that process as well before then branching out to video. So there's definitely, I think, your advice of just starting and being okay with starting and repeating that advice that you've said to the subject matter expert of, this isn't to trip you up or as a political interview to try and really kind of nail you to the cross. This is to educate our buyers and to make you look good in a way as well.
Absolutely. I think that's the key thing. At the end of the day, these people as well, you trust them to go to trade fairs and represent you. You trust them to go to customers and represent you there. You trust them to say the right thing in those spaces. So, doing that process is in front of a video camera, especially doing it as a live stream, is very good, I find, because it sort of commits people. They know that they have to answer something and keep it short, and it avoids the problems of recorded interviews where people say, "Oh, let me do that again," and they can get themselves wrapped up in knots. So it helps them to come to the point quickly and do it in a way that's replicates how you'd experience them in person.
Brilliant. And Stuart, I really appreciate you taking the time to go through this mastermind, and I think it's a really good in-depth kind of review on SME interviews, the benefits of them, as well as how to actually get started that process and build that story arc and how to approach those interviews. This will be shared with the Makers Marketing community. I think it'll be a really, really valuable resource. Where can people contact you if they have any questions about your service or any questions about, this interview itself? Where's the best place to come contact you?
So the easiest place to find me is on that business social media platform, LinkedIn. My name's Stuart Cording. I run under the name Cording Consulting, and I also offer sort of SME video podcast as a service interview, as a service I call Yourcast. So if anyone's interested, simply get in touch with me there or search for that and Cording Consulting on Google, and you'll find me soon enough.
Perfect. Thanks, Stuart. Great to chat.
Thanks, Elliot. I really appreciate it.